people. Welcome to the League of Women Voters. And a reminder to most of you and anyone who doesn't know, the League is a 104-year-old organization that started with the beginning of women's suffrage here in the United States in 1920. And it is nonpartisan, and it is made up of both men and women, and encourages informed and active participation in our democracy. We work to increase understanding of major policy issues, and we also work to influence public policy through education and advocacy. Sometimes the League is, people get confused because they think we just sit back and let happen whatever happens. But that's not true. We do not endorse or oppose candidates, but we are advocates on issues after we have studied them. And of interest is that the League has several positions on environmental issues at the national, state, and local levels. And the national one, which is pretty broad, but we have local ones also. The national one says the League supports environmentally sound policies that reduce energy growth rates, emphasizes energy conservation, and encourages the use of renewable resources. And that's the most current kind of overarching environmental position, but there are a lot of subcategories on water and land use and so forth. Tonight, our speaker is Cindy Shellito, Dr. Cindy Shellito. She is a professor of meteorology in the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Northern Colorado. She is principal investigator on the NSF-sponsored project COOLER, spelled COOLER in caps. And it stands for, this is interesting, Community Collaboration and Learning for Climate Resilience. She's a meteorologist, climate scientist, and climate change educator. She is passionate about engaging students in learning about climate change and inspiring them to seek ways to take action. And I would assume extending that to the rest of the community also. Her PhD focused on using numerical models to simulate warm climates in Earth's deep past. Her primary areas of specialization include climate variability and change, and climate change communication. Through the Fulbright Scholar Exchange Program, she has worked with scientists and educators in Ecuador, Vietnam, and Singapore to better understand the impacts of climate change and develop engaging climate change curricula for students. Her work now focuses on understanding the impacts of modern global warming, supporting women in science, and building climate change resilience by empowering students and community members to take action. Welcome, Dr. Shellito.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my slides here.
And I didn't introduce, but she should be noted. We have a student, Sydney Klug. Is that right?
Klug, yeah.
Klug, okay. I'm married to a German, so I should know that. Who is also going to be working with Cindy.
Yeah. And let me get, so you should be able to see my screen now. I'm also going to open up the chat because I tend to do things interactively. So I may make you type some things as we go along here, in part because I like to get to know my audience and who I'm talking to. So Kathleen, for the invitation to speak with y'all today. I'm really excited to get out and talk to as many different people in the community as possible, in part because of this work we're doing to better understand the impacts of climate change in Colorado and to find ways to build resilience. So I'm going to start again with a couple of questions just so I can get to know you all better. I do want to ask first, are you all in Greeley? Is this a Greeley group or Northern Colorado in general?
Yes, I think so. Speak up if you're not.
Okay. All right. So I have a number of questions that I normally ask groups when I start speaking, just to get an idea of who's here. I have like 4 questions here, but I'm actually just going to have you focus on 2 of them since I already know you're from Greeley. But I'm really interested in knowing like where you grew up, in part because as we think about the climate changing, part of what we're perceiving depends on what we learned when we were young and the types of experiences that we had. So I'm curious to hear about where you all grew up. And then I'm going to skip the second 2 questions here. And I want to know also, what is it that you want to learn about today? I'm not sure I'll talk about it, but I am curious to know, when you heard that this was a talk about climate change, I'm curious to hear what you were thinking and what sort of things you would love to know about it. So questions number 1 and 4, those are the ones to focus on. All right. So I'll give you a minute. The beautiful picture of the globe. I think this is an image downloaded from yesterday. Big, these the globe, because it gives me such an idea of what's happening around the Earth and all of the different climates that we have from the pole to the equator. Right, we have Midwest, New England, Chicago. We have a good representation from around the country here.
Do we have to, are we supposed to answer 2?
No, you can only just focus on 1 and number 4. So
Okay.
4 is
Oh, number
what do you
4,
want to
okay.
learn about? Yeah, that'll
Okay.
just save us some time. I'm curious to know, like, what is it that you thought of when you heard the topic for today's talk? I'm always curious to hear what people are thinking about when they hear about climate change.
So Cindy, this is Patty. I'm on my phone and I don't see where I can put in the chat.
Sure, just tell me then if you want.
I grew up and I wanted to hear about climate in this area.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's kind of hard. It's always hard to enter things on your phone on the phone. I can never find the chat box on the phone. All right.
Or it is okay.
Great. All right. So I see some good things here. Yeah. What do we expect going forward? And what impacts do we have? What can we do to mitigate things? Yeah, how can we reduce the climate change that we're seeing? Okay. These are great. Please continue to add if you think of things throughout this talk. I'd love to hear more. If you think of questions as we're going along, feel free to enter those in the chat box. I'm actually going to close my chat box right now so I can see my screen a little bit better. But if something comes up, it's really important. Somebody just turn on your mic and say, "Hey, I've got a question." I'm happy to pause and answer there. All right, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself. That helps me. I can share a little bit about my background. Kathleen already gave you kind of my history, but I love teaching and I've taught many different subjects in meteorology and climate. That's been my focus for the past 20 years. I love science, and Kathleen mentioned that I had studied past climate for my PhD. At some here, and it was not something we were just trying to predict. And I think at that point, I felt like I needed to do more. So I started trying to think about how could I have a greater impact. And I began teaming up with people from other disciplines and other backgrounds to think about ways that we could address climate change and from an interdisciplinary perspective. How can we bring together people from a broad range of expertise and try to think of solutions or ways to move forward? So I did that, and we got a grant from the National Science Foundation, which was super helpful. So our grant, as Kathleen mentioned, we call it COOLER, Community Collaboration Learning for Climate Resilience. And this is our NSF-funded initiative, and our goal is to develop what's called a learning ecosystem to strengthen climate change education and local place-based climate change resilience. So our goal is to try to bring people together, expertise from the university, students, and community, to find solutions to local climate-related challenges. And there's a picture of our faculty team there, and we have 2 consultants that work with us. We also have a team of 4 students, and I didn't have their pictures up here today, but Sydney is one of the students working with us this year, and they do so much for us too. So we have a good team, and we just started this grant last year. So we're in our first year, and we have another 1.5 years to go. So we're kind of in setting things up, and we're hoping that after this grant is done, we will get some more money to do more work. So more specifically, our goals involve working again with these 3 groups, students, and we're trying to figure out how do we prepare them to work with community stakeholders on projects that build resilience to climate change impacts. And not just science students, but we want to work with students in every discipline. We want students in music to understand how climate change impacts them and is going to impact their career and their lives in the future. And we want students to be able to know how do we stay informed about these issues, because voting is really important when it comes to climate change and environmental issues, and we want all of our students to be informed. We also want to build expertise about climate change and climate change resilience among the faculty at UNC, people beyond the sciences, because we need them to include climate change in their courses, especially for the students who aren't taking the sciences. This is something, climate change is going to impact every aspect of our lives, and we need all faculty to be involved in this effort. And then finally, we want to connect with community groups. How do we develop resources for community members to begin to think about it, make decisions, or take actions around climate change challenges? And how can we work with community members? So that's
Okay, Cindy, we're losing your
Audio.
audio a little bit.
uh-oh.
You're coming
Okay.
in and out. Okay, you're good there.
Am I good now?
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Maybe I need to maybe hold my microphone out away from my close a little bit. Let me know if anything else, if you have any problems. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. I want to spend a few minutes kind of giving you a background about climate change science and what it is we're doing here. So climate science is really the study of all the physical factors that control climate on Earth. And when we refer to climate change, we're referring to change in the global average climate that's evidenced by increases in global average temperature. So we're looking at one thing specifically, the average temperature around the entire planet. And what we see is that's increasing over time, caused by an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is a chart that shows us the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide is what we call a greenhouse gas. It absorbs energy coming from the Earth, and it sends that energy back to the Earth, and it helps keep us warm. We need it to survive, but if it gets to be too high, if the levels keep increasing, the planet is going to basically trap more heat and we're going to get warmer. So this is a chart showing a change in carbon dioxide since 1960. So about 60 years of increase in carbon dioxide on Earth. And just to give you an idea, and the numbers we use here are in this parts per million. But the point is that we have increased somewhere around 30 to, about 35% or so since in the last 60 years. So there's been this large increase. And along with that, we see warming almost everywhere. The warming is not the same everywhere. So in some places it warms more than in others. But we do see anywhere from, almost nothing to up to 4 to 5 degrees Celsius of warming. So that's getting up to about 8 degrees of Fahrenheit in some places, 8 to 10 degrees of Fahrenheit in some places. So we see this is what we refer to when we talk about climate change and global warming. So global warming is a form of climate change. It is the warming of climate. Here in Greeley, this is data from our UNC weather station compiled by one of our other students. And it shows the number of days that we have every year where our maximum temperature tops out above 90 Fahrenheit.
Wow.
So yeah, if you can think back, every year we have a number of days above 90. And when I first moved to Colorado 20 years ago, there were a few days each year that got above 100. We have more now. And this chart kind of gives you an idea of how that number is changing over time. We have way more days above 90 Fahrenheit now than we did back in the 1970s, for example. We also have more days with a minimum temperature above 60. So these are kind of two parameters we're using to give us an idea about how temperatures have changed over time. So if you're thinking that summers are getting warmer, you are correct. I don't have a chart here that shows first and last frost dates, because that's also something very interesting, especially if you're a gardener. You want to know when to plant your garden. What we have found is that the last frost date has not changed very much. You should still wait till Mother's Day, at least, to plant your garden. But our first frost date has changed and is now in October. So your garden will probably last through September, anyway, most years. Not every year, but most years now you might be able to get your garden to grow through September. So our growing season has been extended by about 12 days in the past 50 years. And most of that has happened in September. All right. Last summer was one of the warmest summers globally on record, and it was shocking. The fact that we had almost every other day, there was a temperature record broken for the global average temperature. We had the hottest July on record. This chart on the bottom here, let's see if I can get a little pointer. Yeah, and this chart on the bottom shows us differences in temperature from what we call normal, or normal being the average temperature from 1850 to 2023. And you can see that basically as I can't see the scale. Yeah, once we get into the 1970s and 1980s, our temperatures are consistently getting warmer and warmer and warmer. And last July just beat all the records everywhere. So we had the hottest July on record. In fact, I think I have another graph that looks very similar to that. Oh, yeah, this is another chart showing us the amazing temperature increase we had in 2023. So these lines here that look like kind of like spaghetti. These are annual records of temperature going throughout the course of a year from January to December. And every year we keep track of how warm does it get in January, June, and July, and then how cold does it get in December. And 2023 is actually has now been declared the warmest year we have ever had on the planet, at least as long as we've been around. So we surpassed, in a lot of places, we surpassed records. We got warmer than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And just to give you an idea, that's about two and a half, little over 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have warmed more than we would like at this point. And one more chart to give you an idea about the crazy July temperature. I think this is just a larger version of the one we just saw. But this shows us the actual temperature, the average temperatures for the world in July, going back to 1940. And the fact is we've gone from averages somewhere around 15.6 degrees Celsius all the way up to 17. So we've warmed about 1.5 degrees in July. So this past year was especially concerning for a lot of scientists because we started to see things we were not expecting to see for another 10 or 15 years. For example, Antarctic sea ice in the past 3 years has reached record lows, and it does not reform during the winter. So Antarctica has been experiencing these record warm temperatures, and during the winter, the sea ice is not reforming to the extent that it should. So, and these were things we were not expecting to see so quickly. Yep, and here's a summary of all the things that we saw last year. And even in the Arctic, Arctic sea ice had some of the lowest on record. So, and we see some of the warmest temperatures around the world. We see earlier formation of tropical hurricanes and cyclones and typhoons. We see some amazingly warm ocean waters. So I think it was last summer, there were some ocean waters up the coast of Florida, and also the summer before that were close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So going swimming off the coast of Florida would have felt like being in a hot tub almost. So yeah, we're seeing some things warm very, very quickly, much more quickly than we were expecting. So the causes and consequences of all these things are really multidimensional. There are so many different things that are basically reacting to this warmth and then feeding back on it. And to build resilience to climate change, we have to cope with and manage these consequences and try to basically try to prevent them from becoming worse. And one of the challenges here is that there's no single solution. So the solutions have to involve everyone and have to involve a range of people with just a large range of expertise. So that's why we're trying to bring together a diverse group of people to work on climate change challenges here in northern Colorado. Okay. I'll often get questions because people think, well, people don't believe in climate change, right? And it turns out that most Americans do believe in climate change. Approximately 72% of people in the United States feel convinced that climate change is happening and it's going to impact them. And Yale Center for Climate Change Communication issues a survey pretty much every year where they're trying to see which percentage of the population is actually very concerned enough to be alarmed about climate change and how many people are, for example, dismissive. And it turns out that at this point in time, about 26%, or 1 in 4 people in the United States are alarmed about climate change. And combine that with the people who are concerned, and we have over half the US population is either alarmed or concerned about climate change. There are people who are disengaged and doubtful, and most of these people have not taken the time to think about it. And then, of course, there will always be the people who are simply dismissive and kind of refuse to believe it. But I think for me, what's been encouraging as somebody who is trying to talk to people about climate change, that number of people who are alarmed has gone up in the last 10 years. In fact, it's doubled. So we've gone from about 12% of the US population being alarmed about climate change to about 26%. So we've seen this increase in people who are very concerned about that. The number of people who are dismissive about climate change has not changed. That's kind of stayed the same. Those people, pretty much don't change. So but this for me is encouraging because it means that more people are paying attention and more people are starting to see the impacts. So a little work with faculty. So we're trying to build this core group of faculty from diverse disciplines who want to bring climate change into their courses. So people who have not studied climate change, but we want them to find ways to connect it to their disciplines. And these people, we've had people from, for example, business, economics, psychology. I've had people in the music department interested in climate change, and I'm working now with a professor in art and visual design who's interested in finding new ways to visualize climate data. So we're getting people involved in this from a broad range of disciplines across campus. We're also trying to involve students, and what we really want our students to do is help them use what they learn in classes in working with community stakeholders about climate change. And that leads us to our third piece of this. Again, we're hoping to connect with community groups on projects that build climate change resilience. And we are focusing on groups that have traditionally not been involved in the discussion. So, for example, youth groups or interest groups, and also groups, BIPOC groups. We have a collaborator right now who's a former student, and she's Native American, and we're hosting an event in a couple of weeks that is focused on helping people talk about what's happening with the land and talking about history of the land and connection and relationship with land. And so it's kind of a way to generate discussion about environmental issues in different groups within different groups of people. Faculty have been really supportive. I often get the question, well, what about the people who don't study climate change? How many of them are really keen on bringing it into their classes? And it turns out that there are actually quite a few. Another professor and I conducted a survey a couple of years ago of professors at UNC. And it turns out that most professors are extremely sure that they really believe climate change is happening, more so than what we might see, for example, in the general public. And most of them are very worried about it and feel that our university needs to do more to prepare our students for adapting to or mitigating climate change impacts. But most professors don't teach climate change, especially if they're not in the sciences. And there are a number of reasons. Some professors find it really hard to make it relevant, or how relevant it is for their teaching. If I talk to somebody, I always tell them I can find some way to make climate change relevant to your class. Whatever you're teaching, if it's woodwind instruments, I can make climate change is relevant. Absolutely.
We're losing you again, Cindy.
Oh, not my internet connection. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just going to say that, yeah, it's hard to get professors to teach climate change because they're so busy and there's so many things going on. So we've been running some workshops where we bring people together from a wide range of disciplines, and we try to map out plans or ideas or ways to connect climate change to their disciplines. And we share resources and ideas. We have a group now that meets once a month, and we're sharing ideas and coming up with plans to help each other out. So it's trying to establish an interdisciplinary collaboration. We also are trying to identify what it is that all university students need to learn about climate change. In my classes, they learn the basic science, and sometimes they learn a little bit about the impacts. And for a very long time, that's pretty much all we taught students about climate change. But it's become very clear in the past few years that we need to focus on solutions, and students really want to understand the impacts and how they can play a role in promoting these solutions or contributing to solutions. The other thing that we now realize we have to include in all of our courses is a component on how to deal with the psychological grief and distress that's associated with climate change. So a lot of students are already experiencing distress and feeling like there's no future for them. How do we help them get through that? How do we help them? Because if you're feeling apathetic or in despair, you're less likely to take action. So the good news is this is a lot, but the good news is we don't have to teach all of this in a single class. And this is why we're trying to start these collaborations across the university to teach students, work with students on these different things in different courses. We're also trying to get students, to think about climate change and connect with students. There's Sydney, who's here on our call today, and Kennedy, one of our other students who's working with us. And they have been setting up tables at the UC, our university center, to ask students what they think about climate change or what they think about climate change on campus. In fact, they're going to be out there tomorrow with a table. So we're trying to find ways to connect to students. Next year, we're looking at having building a cohort of students who will go through a year-long program in learning about climate change and working with community. So this is what's in the works for next year. But our focus is increasing, trying to increase our efforts to focus on these positive solutions and address climate anxiety, because a lot of these students have anxiety about what's coming and what they've seen coming. So much of the news is negative, and it's really hard to put that in perspective. So some of the things that we do to try to help students to feel better about what's happening, I think even just acknowledging that this is a thing, that climate grief or environmental grief is a thing, and that it's a real thing, and that what they're experiencing is valid. There are many bad things happening, and a lot of people feel this way beyond college students. We try to focus on solutions. How do we empower students with solutions to these problems and positive examples? Most people need to feel they're personally having an impact on a time scale with a rapid turnaround. That's a hard thing, because climate change is kind of a slow process. It's happening quickly now, but slow meaning it's happening over a number of years. It's hard to see the impacts of the positive things we're doing. So it's important to kind of emphasize that regularly. And then the other thing that we try to do is help students build community around taking action. At UNC, there's a couple of environmental clubs, a garden club. A group raised money for solar projects in the past. So there are a number of things going on to help students feel like they're having an impact, and actually have an impact on campus. But just to kind of emphasize, this is a very big thing for this generation. There's actually a number of books written about climate anxiety, but a book written especially for this generation by Sarah J. Cattray, Field Guide to Climate Anxiety. And it offers a lot of ideas for ways to get past that anxiety, ways to get past those psychological barriers to taking action. And I think those things are very helpful, not just for students, but for the general public as well, because so many people are bombarded with bad information or terrible, depressing information every day. How do you maintain your spirits? How do you feel like you have a sense of agency and that you can take action? We're trying to connect with community more. I had mentioned earlier that we are connecting with one of our former students who has started a nonprofit called Voices of the Land. And her nonprofit is focused on helping Black and Indigenous communities connect with the land and connect with their heritage. And so we have an event coming up on March 30th at the Rodarte Center in North Greeley, where she has invited a number of Native American elders to tell their stories about the land. And we're co-sponsoring this event as a means of helping community gather together to talk about environmental issues. So I'm actually close to the end. I think I'm doing okay on time here. So this is a summary of all the things that we're trying to do. And I want to open it up for questions. But I also have posed a few questions for you here as well. So, the things that would be helpful that we would like to learn from you is what is it you think that people most need to learn about climate change and sustainability? And what are some of the biggest challenges you think people face when it comes to climate change? And then finally, what does climate resilience on a community level look like to you? So we're curious to hear people's thoughts about these questions. And we also have a newsletter. There's an address down there. I don't know, Sydney, maybe you can post a link to that in the chat. You can find our newsletter subscribe page. We'll give you a few minutes to do that. We could, our newsletter comes out about once a month and kind of gives an update on all of our activities, but we also have little tidbits of information, local climate information in there, data from our weather station. Our next newsletter will have those first and last frost dates that I mentioned. I don't have in the talk tonight. So I'm going to stop there. I hope my audio is not too bad here.
No.
And okay. And I'll check the chat and open up for questions here. So.
Some people have already put some questions in there that you might want to consider.
So Kathleen had a question, what are the other disciplines? So the school investigators on our grant, myself and Dr. Sharon Bywater-Ray, she's actually a geologist, but we have Dr. Chelsea Romulo, she's over in geography and sustainability. So those are the three of us are PIs on the grant. And then we have a couple of consultants who are not at UNC, but helping us with evaluation and community building. And Erika Vera Ponce, she's in Boulder and she's a community builder and she has a background in social research. Our evaluator Rupu, she's actually in New York City, and she also has a background in social research, but she's also very interested in the environment. So I learn a lot from the people on the social side of things. Most of my background is in numerical research and data, but I am learning a lot about community building and what it means to try to understand what communities want and what they need to address big problems. That's probably my learning adventure right now at the stage of my career.
One of the things that I think may have occurred to a number of people in the audience is because the League is so involved in political issues and policy decisions, that area has a huge connection to climate change. So we want to know how we can affect that.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think that this means we need to maybe we need to plan another time to chat at some point about ways that we can connect, or whether it's hosting some events. When we start having more events, we'd like to have you there too. If you to come and chat with people, it'd be great. I want to get to couple other questions. There was the question, what do we mean by climate change resilience? Thank you for that question. I know I was going to share with you what I meant, and then I forgot. So, but by resilience, we mean our ability to bounce back when we have changes. So an example of that, I think about March 2020 when everything shut down. And how did we bounce back? How did we get our food? How do we get our water? Things that one day it's very simple. We have kind of this infrastructure in place. What happens when a piece of that infrastructure fails?
We're losing you again.
Oh, sorry. Maybe it's my jacket here. All right. Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think COVID taught us a lot about how do we bounce back when challenging things happen. Are there other ways that we can get food, other ways that we can distribute resources? Do we have backup systems in place? And for community resilience, what this might mean, for example, if we have a massive drought, how do we support our local farmers? what is it that they need, you know, or what can we keep them going through a very, very dry year? You know, when our farmers markets had to shut down, we would go and try to go directly to the farm and buy them if we could, just to support local farm. That's what I was trying to do, to support local farmers. So how do we have connections within our community that help people survive through these rough times? Can we find ways to pull together? The group that we're working with, Voices of the Land, they are working to help people build gardens in their yards as a food source. So they're actually going out and testing soil and making sure there's nothing harmful in the soil, and then teaching people about what kinds of crops will grow well in the soil that they have there, and given our climate here in Greeley. So that's another example of resilience.
And community gardens would be another.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a good question about the effects of climate change on health issues. And if we're working with the School of Nursing, we are not yet. We have a couple of connections, but we haven't explored those yet. Well, actually, one of those connections is we're working with a professor at CSU who's monitoring air quality near a fracking site in Greeley. And that data is probably going to have health impacts. So I can't say too much more on that right now, but that's one of the areas we're hoping to involve the school health sciences in, because yeah, there's definitely health impacts with air quality, but also prolonged heat exposure. For example, if we're getting now a lot more days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, that has impacts for a lot of people here in Greeley, especially if you're in an old house that doesn't have air conditioning. That's a challenge. So, but yeah, that's a great idea though. We haven't done too much yet with the School of Nursing, but we do have some connections over there. Learning projects. That's one of the things we're looking at doing next year, is having this cohort, bringing together a cohort of students who will learn about climate change together and then go work on community projects. So these might be assisting Voices of the Land, the community group, with soil testing or with garden planting and that kind of thing. So we're hoping to establish some of these kind of service learning projects in the community. And you'll see Sydney has posted a link to our newsletter in the chat, so you can access our newsletter there. And then there's a question about what is the Greeley area doing to address climate change? I don't have an assessment on that. I am putting together, I have a student putting together a document, kind of a vulnerability assessment for Greeley, because we don't actually have one yet. There's one in Fort Collins and Boulder and Loveland. They have all hired companies to do that, but Greeley doesn't have one. So we're trying to put one together. But there are people concerned about climate change. We're actually working with one of the Weld County commissioners, Lori Sane, who is in charge of basically putting together this conference on energy and environment that's held at UNC every year. We have traditionally not been involved in that conference. It's usually where businesses come in, like oil companies or solar power companies, and they talk to each other. But we realized this was happening last year, and we thought, well, we want students to go hear from these companies and hear about local energy companies and what's happening in the community. So we contacted Lori Sane in the Weld, who's a Weld County commissioner, and she's been super helpful and excited about having us on board and bringing students into this conference. And you know, she's somebody who I didn't know her before we started working together, but she's very interested in environmental issues and finding ways also to make our economy stable, but realizing that we need to address changes that we're seeing. So we've had, that's pretty much our only connection right now with government or with anything that's going on within the county or city. Oh, and Julie, thank you for mentioning like how the compiling the data for a larger audience. We're working on this right now. Compiling our local weather station data in a format report that's readable to the general public, and it's going to go out on the web and wherever we are. We will send that out. The vulnerability assessment that so we're hoping to share that broadly in the community. And yeah, I'm happy to share.
So I think the question about how
And,
can we, the league, support your efforts? What can we do?
Yeah, find ways to that connect further. Question, Scott, then my internet is unstable. Yeah, I think that, you know, trying to do is connect with more people. And at some point we're going to be having some more events, and it would be great to have your support and have you there and to have a, you know, to help help us get the word out. I think that would be really helpful.
The other thing that is true for the league is that there is a statewide committee that meets once a month called Climate Emergency. And these are people from all over the state who talk about the very things you're addressing.
Oh, wow. In League of Women Voters?
Yes.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more at some point what they're doing,
Yeah.
or get an idea if we can send somebody to one or
Right.
to join
Actually,
one of their meetings.
Cindy, if you go to have one of your students go to the League of Women Voters of Colorado website, they have a list of all the task forces, and there's a climate task force, and all you have to do is click on it. They meet at regular times every month.
Okay.
You have to sign something that you're not going to disrupt the meeting or something like that. Right. They've had some outspoken people and issues, but yes, you don't have to be a member to sit in and be part of that committee. And you could certainly contribute to that meeting, and also perhaps get an idea on a network for a larger community in the state and what the different leagues are doing. But it's a really strong committee, has some pretty strong leaders, especially in the area of water.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I would we'll check that out.
Okay.
Thank you for letting us know. That's great. And
there's one other area that I think a number of us have been interested in, and that is fracking and the oil and gas industry and methane. And can you address that a little bit? And have you what have you had any connection with some of those folks here in this area? Because it's a very local issue.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'd say, the one connection that we're doing right now is around monitoring the air quality, working with this professor at CSU to monitor air quality. And once we have more of that data, our hope is to do kind of a public outreach education campaign on the air quality data that's from the site. So this is a fracking site near Bella Romero Elementary School. Or the fracking site is right near the elementary school. So they're monitoring air quality at a house right next to the school, or right across the street from the school. So that's the one thing. We yeah, and of course we have talked with some of the other climate action groups. So there's Green Latinas, Patricia Nelson. Oh, we haven't talked to her as much. We've met her, but you know, I know that they're doing a lot of activism or activist work around trying to end that fracking. I think at this point we are focused mostly on education, so trying to understand the data and put the education out, and less on activism in government or lobbying for certain rules. I feel that's not where our strength is, and yeah, it gets a little bit more awkward given that we have federal funding. So we're trying to focus on the data and education side of things rather than the activism. If people are interested in activism after seeing the data and learning more about it, then that's great. Yeah.
Are there any other issues, questions that anyone would like Cindy to address?
I think there's one more question here
Mary had
about,
one.
oh, go ahead. About how the average person can help mitigate climate change. Where can we start with grassroots efforts? And I've thought a lot about this because I think about it in my daily life. And I've recycled for as long as I can remember, and I've made my home energy efficient. But I think where things really start to spread is just by talking about climate change. That is the most important thing you can do, is talk about it. Because actually a lot of people don't talk about it. It's something on the order of only 10% of people actually talk about climate change. And some people are afraid to talk about it because they don't know who they're going to be talking with. So I think that is the most important thing you can do. Talk about it over coffee, talk about it with anybody, just to start getting people more comfortable talking about climate change. Yeah. So that's usually what I tell my students now, because they're some of the people that are afraid to talk about it sometimes. They're afraid to talk about it at Thanksgiving dinner. And I say, well, there's ways that we can approach it without making it confrontational. We all share values. We all share some values. Find out what values you share with the person that you're talking to. And those values are probably impacted somehow by climate change. And but the important thing is to connect through shared values, I think, and that's a really important thing that we can all do.
Is that where you were talking about a vulnerability assessment, and that we do not have one here? Is that a means to an end of a conversation for practical impacts that might make people more interested in the topic of climate change? And
yeah, so
and what is
the
that?
vulnerability, yeah, the vulnerability assessment is actually a scientific assessment. So we're looking at the data. How vulnerable are we to things like drought or flood? Specifically in Greeley, we're more vulnerable to drought. And that looks at our risk for drought and what can we do to help mitigate that. So maybe it's homeowners associations deciding not to require people to keep their yards perfectly green all summer, or allowing people to put in rock gardens, things that can make us less vulnerable to drought. What can we do? So the vulnerability assessment is looking at the data to think about what can we do physically in our community to make us less vulnerable to some of the impacts of climate change.
Do you have any data like about frequency of, say, hailstorms or severity of hailstorms changing, anything like that?
That's a good question. I don't have it on me.
Okay.
But yeah, we have seen, I can speak more generally about that, not so much about Greeley itself, but we know that the frequency of these types of extreme events is increasing. So having a warmer atmosphere makes it more likely that we will see some of these types of severe thunderstorms and hailstorms, the damaging hailstorms, for example, or the tornadoes in the southeast. These patterns are changing based on the timing of warm temperatures and moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. So here in the central United States, those two things impact when and where we see severe weather. So those things are changing. I don't have the data with me, but yeah, there is.
Nope.
Looks at that and has,
Okay.
We've lost you.
Yeah, well, you're frozen,
it
but
does seem
maybe it'll unfreeze in a
it's
minute. But you're answering a lot of questions,
oh,
even though your system doesn't want you to.
I know. Let me turn off my and Maple. Okay. So now you can still, maybe I can save a little bit on resources.
So Mary, do you
Okay,
feel like
other question?
yeah, Mary, do you feel
Oh,
like
my
the
screen.
question has been addressed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm just a gardener and I don't know, it just seems like weather is just kind of changing and makes it a little, harder to plan. And I mean, Weld County is so agricultural that seems like it would be of interest. Although an opposing interest to the oil and gas industry in our county. But yeah, it just seems like, we've just had more weather events.
Yeah, and that's actually, it's a bit harder to compile that data from our weather station because we just keep track of daily high temperatures and low temperatures and rainfall amounts. So it's hard to keep track of the hail. But the Weather Service in Boulder, they have some of that data.
I'm going to the CSU Green School right now, and so we have had some discussion on they had some data that did indicate that there seemed to be more severe or more frequent temperature fluctuations in the fall. You mentioned that the season extends, the first frost in the fall is extended.
Mm-hmm.
But then it seems like we have, 70 degrees and then it plunges and, how that affects what we can grow here and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, those rapid changes in the spring and in the fall, or the later spring, when we're trying to plant or trying to decide when to plant our gardens, right? That's when
Yeah.
it makes things hard, right?
Yeah. Or to get
And I
food.
usually wait, yeah, I usually wait till after Memorial Day. Everybody says Mother's Day, but I always wait till after Memorial Day because we always get something cold after Mother's Day. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Any other? Well, I'm just amazed at what I haven't thought of. So this has been a real learning experience for me. And you've opened up a whole bunch of doors that I hope we can take advantage of. And I know that we'll be reaching out to you as we see opportunities for things that the league might do or ways in which we can support your work. And we'll be checking out the climate group, the statewide group, to see if there's any crossover that would be good.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we
Great.
really appreciate you and Sydney coming and spending your time with us. And I do thank you so much. And it's so good to know you're there and you're doing what you're
Oh,
doing.
thanks. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed chatting with you all, and I would love
Yeah.
to chat with you again.
And I want to remind you again, on the 27th of March, there is that meeting at the Blue Mug that anyone is invited to come to, and from 3:30 to 4:30. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the league and how you can do some things that might be good for resilience to climate change and other things. And then on the 20th of April, we will have our annual meeting, and you would RSVP Bonnie Funk to come to that. Jean, is there anything else that I've missed that I need to say, or have I gotten everything?
I don't think so. I think we're good. Really
Okay.
appreciate you being here with us, Cindy.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you again for inviting us here. And yeah, enjoyed talking with you. And we'll
Yeah.
talk
Thank you
again.
so much.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for all
Thank
your
you.
good work on this important
Thanks.
topic.
Yeah, and we'll get information, but we've been able to glean in our notes and from the recorded video recording that'll be on YouTube out to more of our members too. So
Great.
thank you again.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Thank
Cindy.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Good night.
Bye.
Okay.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.